So what is likely to transpire in the talks tomorrow and in the coming week between the Ukrainians and the Americans? To talk about that, I'm joined by Manjeev Singh Puri, former senior diplomat. Thank you, sir, for joining on the show. Always a pleasure to have you. Now, my opening question: when Zelensky meets MBS tomorrow, what are they going to talk about? What is likely to transpire between them? What could the Crown Prince tell Zelensky?
Anupal, thank you, and thank you for inviting me to your show. Look, Saudi Arabia, if you will recall, for quite some time have had a certain entree in this entire conflict. If you recall, they had managed to arrange a prisoners exchange sometime during the UNFCCC COP in Dubai in November 2023. President Putin had also visited the Saudis. So, there is a certain issue there. The Americans also know the Saudis, so there is some reason why these talks are taking place there. Now, MBS is an important play for the Americans, for the Russians, and the Ukrainians also know that. And therefore, my understanding is that the most important thing President Zelensky will try and tell him is that, look, whatever may have happened in Washington, he wants to try and salvage things, wants to have a deal, wants to take things forward because American support for his country is absolutely essential. And once, that gets, let me say, internalized by the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, it would also be good for him to be able to relay this across to the Americans, that you certainly have an opportunity to get it from the horse's mouth yourself, the Ukrainian delegation. But I'm telling you, they are now willing, no matter whatever happened, let's try and find a deal forward.
Okay. So is it that, Zelensky today said that he's fully committed to the talks of his country with the Americans? He's already written a letter to President Trump. President Trump also says that looks like he's come around. So does he now realize that he doesn't have the cards, as some would say? President Trump rather rudely told him after the Americans stopped the supply and intelligence sharing to him.
No, Amritpal, look, these are the limits of being somebody who's dependent on others. He knew that very well. And whether he has the cards or not, this was known from the beginning. But, if you are the big supporter, and the Americans are certainly the big supporters, and the turnaround there has been 180 degrees. This is also something that needs to be understood out there. What happened between them, nobody here would say that President Zelensky handled the matters very well. But on the other hand, you also have to agree that for someone who has had such a long relationship of a particular kind, the issue of what people call ambush or the way he was treated, etc., would have also left him quite stunned and taken aback, quite apart from the English language business. So let's leave that aside. The Europeans who came to his defense, of course, also told him that, look, they have limitations. And getting the act together with the Americans was of interest and useful. Now, I am sure even at the American end, there is a certain understanding that, look, what we are proposing is fine, but let's also perhaps try and see what we can do and take things forward. Look, they have a certain interest in the minerals deal, but I think more than that, President Trump thinks that his much better and more important element for him is that he finds ways to answer that fundamental promise that he made during the elections, that he will stop the war. The second point that he has often stressed, and people tend to, forget it, is that he says that he can talk to Putin. With him around, President Putin will be willing to do a deal. So, there is this entire issue of building his own reputation, his legacy, and standing up for what he has said he will be able to do.
True, Ambassador Puri, but that's from Donald Trump's point of view. From Zelensky's point of view, would he then now give up on security guarantees on which he was very insistent because the ground situation doesn't augur well for him without the American support? And as you said, the Europeans told him that you need to mend your fences with the Americans, otherwise it's a lost cause for you. So will he now give up on something he was very insistent upon, security guarantees?
So, Amritpal, let's also understand that President Trump has been saying that the deal itself is a security guarantee, with the presence of American business people, enterprises, etc. Now, many others would say, that's not really the case. It takes a long time, etc. The question of buying it is a different matter. But let me put this across to you, something like this. The issue really at stake is this thing which everybody has forgotten, and I think even Zelensky is having to accept it, which is the so-called territorial integrity of Ukraine. And the areas that the Russians have annexed, are they going to return it? Doesn't look like it. President Trump has been quite clear in saying, look, that's gone and that's over. Now let's look at what can be done. Let's also understand that the Ukrainians must be quite war fatigued. They've taken.
So, are you saying the Ukrainians are not, Ambassador? Are you saying the Ukrainians are not getting back their eastern areas and Donetsk, etc.?
Look, I would be very surprised if that happened.
Okay.
Because the Russians have, of course, said no question. The Americans have also, in fact, President Trump has said, look, what's gone is gone. Let's just look at doing a peace the way they are. It's a tough call for anybody who's the leader of a country to accept this kind of stuff.
And
President
would
Zelensky
then
does not he finds himself between a rock and a hard place.
Right, sir. But would then Zelensky insist to keep what he's occupied in Russia in the Kursk region?
Let me say those are relatively smaller things, and I'm not sure even that would be possible, because the deal would have to have a certain amount of accommodation for the Russians. Perhaps how much of security guarantees the Americans give in terms of the Europeans saying they might put some boots on the ground. Would the Americans agree to give them a kind of security cover, an air cover, etc.? We all have to watch and see what happens. But one thing is clear, the Ukrainians and the Ukrainian leadership kind of realizes that, look, their entire set of backers, including those who say we are strongly with them, they have their limitations, and the situation is between a rock and a hard place. Bargain as well as you can, but you would perhaps be best off. Why they've changed their mind? Why have the Americans had 180 degrees turnaround? Those are academic questions. How does it matter? You have to deal with the situation as presented to you.
Okay, but then, the question arises that Donald Trump may be able to get what he says he wants to get, or what he had promised to his electorate to get, a truce deal, and fast. But wouldn't that be shaky if it comes on the terms it comes on?
So, Mr. Trump has been very clear that as long as he is president, the Russians won't do anything. He is confident because of what he believes is a relationship with President Putin, and also in his own great confidence in what the United States would do under his leadership. If I'm not mistaken, he said the same thing about President Xi Jinping and the Taiwanese question. So, leaders take a call, they make a determination, they have a certain perspective, they put it forward. And what exactly does shakiness mean? I mean, if this thing holds out and things go forward, we will see after a little while what happens. Now, the Europeans and others have been long brought up on the idea that the Russians want to move in towards them. Will that go away? It takes a very long time to build this kind of trust. And recent memories will not serve anybody in any direction. But, you have to give time. What else can you do? Are you in a position to doing it yourself? It would appear that the Europeans can't do it by themselves. They've themselves said that to President Zelensky. The United States has a president who has a certain worldview and a certain desire to do things in a particular manner. Their involvement and their cooperation support is essential for him. So that's the situation in which the Europeans, as well as, of course, the Ukrainians, President Zelensky, right in the middle of it, find themselves.
Okay. So we've talked about what the Americans want, we've talked about what Zelensky wants, but before I let go of you, what do the Russians want? Because after Donald Trump issued a veiled threat or an open threat to the Russians saying, well, I'll put more banking restrictions on you, without further elaborating what that meant, more than the ones already in place. What would the Russians want? Because the Russians had said we have Ankara, or I think the Istanbul proposal is a good starting point to talk.
Look, fundamentally, in my understanding, one particular thing is Ukraine is not becoming a member of NATO.
Okay.
This is also something that President Trump has sort of said, maybe explicitly or otherwise. The other thing is the areas that they've got, the so-called Russian-speaking areas of Ukraine. I can't see them wanting to give those up at all.
Okay.
And then other kinds of normalizations in terms of economic sanctions and so on and so forth. That's what they will try. They will also try and negotiate hard in the matter. But let's also understand, I just saw a recent report which said that some 800,000 troops have been lost by the Russians. So, they've also taken a hit. There are issues at their end too.
Oh, they are
And
economically
therefore,
very badly stressed.
look, I have been to Moscow recently. In some senses, one can say, yes, they are stressed, but it's a huge economy and a rather big place.
Okay.
They are taking a hit. And definitely, they would like to find some kind of a way forward vis-a-vis the Western countries. May not easily happen with the Europeans. Why not start the oil trade, etc.? But with the Americans, if something happens, lots of openings happen. So I think a certain amount of interest, or more than a certain amount of interest, rests with President Putin. It is also there with all the other parties to the game. However, is it really going to be a peace which kind of satisfies the Ukrainians and satisfies the Europeans? That may not really be the case.
Okay. We'll have to see where this goes. But thank you very much, Ambassador Manjeev Singh Puri, for joining us and lending us your insight. Thank you.